Well, hi everyone. How's everyone doing? So I'm going to go ahead and just talk a little bit about MassChallenge to give you guys some perspective. But before I started, I wanted to just say that if anyone is like having, whoops, sorry, I can't clip this on, so I'm just going to hold it. But if anyone has any issue with understanding, if I'm speaking too quickly, just raise your hand and I can sort of repeat whatever I said. But before I start, could everyone sort of just quickly introduce themselves and say what organization they're with, just so that I get a sense for who I'm speaking to? Maybe I'll start here and then we can work back.
Moscow Innovation Development Center.
Hi.
In the same place.
Oh.
I'm from Internet Initiatives Development Fund, from the seventh floor here.
Thanks.
I'm Vladimir Kosteyev. I'm from R&D, Russian Innovation.
I'm Alexander. I'm from Russian Venture Company Investment Department.
Maxim Mikhailov, Skolkov Foundation.
My name is Viktor Glushkov. I'm representing International Business Studies.
Vladimir Proshev, Moscow Innovation Development Center.
Hi.
Daria, RVC.
Furov Sergey, Physical Business George Goldman from RBC.
Hi, George. Awesome, yeah. So thanks you guys so much for coming. I'm really excited to chat with all of you. And I think, so I prepared, I'm going to give a quick overview of MassChallenge and talk a little bit about what we do in Boston. And then I'm going to kind of move into a presentation that I prepared that talks a little bit about fundraising and working with partners. That's something that we do quite a bit of in MassChallenge, and Yulia has told me that it's something that's very interesting to people here. So we'll talk a little bit about that too, but I'm going to probably try to keep things pretty informal and try to, be more conversational. So if you have any questions, please just interrupt me and ask, and I would like to make this as relevant as possible to you guys. So, so let me give an overview of MassChallenge. So MassChallenge, we're based in Boston, and we're the world's largest startup accelerator. We're the first to support early stage entrepreneurs with no strings attached. And we use a competition framework to leverage our accelerator program. So our mission is to catalyze a global startup renaissance. And I think it really helps to understand our mission and our structure and who we are and what we do if I explain a little bit about our founding story and sort of how we came to be and how it all got started. So back in 2008, our two founders, John and Akhil, were working at Bain consulting company in Boston. They had both gone to business school. They had just graduated. One went to Harvard Business School, one went to Sloan at MIT. And they had pretty, startup-y entrepreneurial backgrounds, right? So they had been doing kind of some startup things. They had been involved in a lot of different organizations. They love startups. But they went to business school and they had a lot of debt, and they thought, okay, I'll work at Bain, get some money, and then once I get my big bonus, I'll quit and start a startup. And so they were working at Bain and they hated it. They really didn't like their jobs. They really wanted to start a startup. But in that moment, it was December of 2008, and the Dow had just fallen below 7,000. It was talk of the next great recession. Capital was fleeing risk, and nobody wanted to support startups. It didn't really seem like in that moment that it was possible to launch a startup and that the society wanted to support entrepreneurs. It really seemed like greed was dominating society and dominating the economy, especially in the United States. It seemed like everyone was very focused on value capture, sort of how can I capture my slice of the pie, rather than building new pies, right? To sort of build more value for everyone. Once the pie grows, there's more pie for everyone. And sort of the people that do that, the people that create new businesses, new jobs, new optimism in society, are the entrepreneurs. They are the value creators. They are at the origin of the value chain in society. And this was sort of the philosophical backbone of MassChallenge. And so in this moment, they came up with this idea: why not create a platform where high-impact entrepreneurs from all over the world can gain access to the resources that they need to launch and grow their businesses quickly without taking anything from them? Why should we not place the entrepreneur at the center of the equation and build our society around the entrepreneur? And so that's where MassChallenge came to be. The way that it works, in a practical matter, we're a competition. We run the entire year. So we begin at the beginning of the year accepting applications from all over the world. This year, we just closed our applications a couple of weeks ago. We received 1,600 applications from 40 countries and 50 states or something like that. So quite a significant diversity, and from all industries, right? So we're not just supporting high tech, we're supporting clean tech, life sciences, pharmaceutical companies, general retail companies. So they're making shoes, they're making clothes, they're making food, as well as nonprofit and social impact companies. Social entrepreneurship is very popular and a growing sort of sector of entrepreneurship in the United States. So we narrow it down to 128 companies. And in order to do this, we use volunteer judges, experts from the community, who volunteer their time to evaluate pitches and evaluate applications. And so from that way, we're able to take it down from 1,600 all the way down to 128. This happens in May. And then from June through October, it's a 4-month accelerator program. And this program is intensive. It involves mentorship and educational curriculum that's specific to the different industry tracks. All 128 companies move into the same space in our office, so we have a pretty big office, and we're able to provide all of these resources for them. We give away about $10 million in-kind prizes, so software, access to free legal service, free PR service, this education. We have about 400 mentors active in the program, so during the summer it's quite a busy time in our office with about 400 different entrepreneurs and all of their mentors. And so at the end of the summer, in October, the competition resumes again, and we narrow it down to 26 winners. And those 26 winners split $1 million and about $10 million in in-kind prizes that we give away in the form of non-dilutive cash grants at our awards ceremony at the end of the year. So if you think about MassChallenge, what makes us different from other accelerator programs, 3 things are probably the most important. One is our scale. So the fact that we have 128 companies in one program at the same time makes us bigger than almost any other accelerator program in the world. The fact that we're industry agnostic, so we have startups from every industry, as I mentioned before. And then the most important thing is that we don't take equity from the companies. And we operate as a nonprofit organization. So everything that we give to the startups over the course of the program is completely free. No strings attached. We ask nothing of the startups. We don't even ask that they move permanently to Boston. If you are an international startup coming from a different country and you want to join the MassChallenge program, you're welcome to do that. And you're welcome to come and spend the summer or part of the summer engaging in our program and then go back to wherever country that you're from. We had 4 startups from Russia last year, and one of them was a winner, which was really exciting. So this is a little bit of information about MassChallenge, a little bit of information about the success that we've seen from our alumni. So we have been around, as I said, since 2010 was our first program. So we have now accelerated 4 classes of startups, so 128 startups about in each class. So 489 companies have been through MassChallenge and are now MassChallenge alumni. We keep in close contact with these companies and we track their success. So we have seen that out of these nearly 500 alumni, they have collectively raised about $475 million in funding. They have generated about $200 million in revenues, and they have created about 4,000 jobs. And I forgot, actually, I have some more statistics. So this, shows the growth in jobs. This shows the growth in funding, and then this shows the growth in revenues. And this information has to do with how many companies are still alive. So 89% of them are still alive, and or they haven't been acquired, or they haven't gone out of business. And sort of the way that it all works, and the importance of this slide is the fact that we see MassChallenge as sort of the center of a startup ecosystem. And I think this is a really important piece of our sort of philosophical standpoint and the way that we look at the community and the way that we look at supporting entrepreneurs. So I mentioned earlier, why not put the entrepreneur in the center of the community? And so what happens when you take 128 high potential, high impact startups and aggregate them in one location? And these are startups that have been chosen by the community. They represent the top 8% of the applicant pool. is that it represents a tremendous amount of value for the community, and it creates what we say like a watering hole effect. What this means is that all of the different resources are gathered toward the startups, and so we're able to attract the highest levels of government, the highest levels of significant brands and businesses, foundations, philanthropists, high impact and successful entrepreneurs from across the ecosystem are all attracted to this program, and it creates this accelerating effect where all the resources that you need are concentrated in one place, and your activity and your growth as a startup becomes accelerated and compressed into this amount of time. And so this is how MassChallenge works. So it's really exciting, and I'm really happy to be here. And before I kind of go into my other presentation, I wonder if anyone has any questions about MassChallenge, now that I've talked for a while. Yes?
Do you have any remote program, so to say, online program or just necessary to come together in one place?
This is a very interesting question, actually. So the question was about online programs. So do we have any online educations, or MOOCs as they're called in the United States and elsewhere? So we don't have right now any sort of online program, so to speak. So our mentorship and our competition framework is completely online in terms of the technology that powers the program. So for example, if you are a startup from Russia and you want to enter MassChallenge, the significant value that you're going to get is from being present. But you can access the mentorship directory, so the 400 mentors in the program, on through the directory online. And you can engage in Skype conversations and everything online. And our competition framework is also online, except for the pitch part. And so you can be a judge in Russia, and you can be judging applications for the competition, and you can do that online remotely from your location. But the question of developing a massive open online course or some sort of curriculum that's online is something that's very interesting to us, and we would absolutely love to engage in that. Right now we're still kind of a startup, and we're somewhat resource constrained, but it's something that we've definitely been thinking about in terms of a long-term strategy. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you gather that statistics about jobs created, money raised, etc.?
Yeah, so the question was about how do I get those statistics? I mentioned earlier about the number of jobs that were created, the number of, the amount of funding that has been generated or raised by the startups. So our joke, maybe it's not that funny in Russian, it's not really that funny in English either, but is we do not take equity, but we survey heavily. Sort of rhymes. It's not funny. But essentially the idea is, so we don't take equity, right? So it's free. But we survey heavily. So we annoy the startups by sending them lots of surveys. We survey them twice a year, so once in April and once in October. And we ask, so the art of making surveys, right, is very complicated, and you want to make a really good survey to collect the right amount of information from your teams. And then we compile this information, aggregate it over the startups, and come up with this. So we ask them, how much funding have you raised? We ask them, how much revenue have you generated? And all of these questions.
How do you check all these numbers?
Essentially, we use the honor code, so the honor system. So we don't really do a lot of background checks. The startups are required. The fact is that it remains completely private, so nobody else has access to it. So there's no reason why they would report an incorrect number, because it will never be public. So, but it's true, it's hard, especially with the numbers that we have, it's kind of like a university that collects information about its alumni, like how much money do you make after graduation, and sort of what job are you in, and things like that, so.
Looks better.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, George.
Thank you.
Yes?
You said that it's a non-profit program. Who pays for that?
That's an excellent question. And that's actually the subject of my next presentation, fundraising. No, it's a really, really good question. So actually, I'll hold off on answering that for now, and I'll address that in my next presentation.
Now, question.
Yes?
How do you choose the entrepreneurs around whom you are building this, sort of thing?
That's a really good question. So how do we choose the entrepreneurs, right? Because unlike other accelerator programs that take equity from the companies and are perhaps more investor driven, right? They need to pick companies that are going to generate a return for their investors. And this is the business model. Our business model is a nonprofit, and we're funded by sponsors, which I'll explain more. So it's not important to us investability, right? So our judges, like I said, we have about 600 judges, who are volunteers from the community, who evaluate the applications and the pitches. They choose the startups. We simply aggregate their scores and determine the top 128. They're not looking for investability. What they're looking for is really two things. So impact and potential. So impact is your startup going to change the world or significantly disrupt an industry or be tremendously innovative in some way? You have to demonstrate that you're going to have a massive impact. And you define that impact. So that impact could be, I'm going to have a $2 billion company, or I'm going to feed 100,000 hungry children, or I'm going to develop a technology that is going to change the way that we power our cars, or something like that. You have to demonstrate that you have a tremendous impact and that you have the potential to achieve that impact, right? That's the potential piece. So you don't just have a great idea, right? Ideas are everywhere. Execution is rare, right? So the idea that you'll actually achieve that. So that could be the strategy, it could be the talent on your team. It could be some sort of special secret sauce that convinces the judges that not only do you have a great idea that's going to have massive impact, but you are going to execute on your idea. So that's what they look for. Overall, they have sort of some more serious questions about the competitive landscape, the marketing, the financials, the IP that they go through, but at the end of the day, those are what they're looking for. Yeah. Any other questions about MassChallenge? Okay. I'll move on to the next presentation. I'll talk a little bit more generally about fundraising, but if at any time anyone has any questions about MassChallenge and it's not relevant, just go for it and we can talk about that. So is it this one? Just view it as a presentation, okay. Okay, cool. So I have put together a little bit of information about fundraising, right, which is something that is very important to MassChallenge, and it's very important to me. This is what I do at MassChallenge. This is my role. I suppose I should tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm Kara Shurmantine. Zdravstvuyte. I'm Kara Shurmantine, and I'm the Partnerships Manager at MassChallenge. I told you about MassChallenge. Partnerships Manager means that I work with our corporate and other partners, right? So the people that are giving money to MassChallenge, our funders, our sponsors, I work with them. I look to find new ones, and I look to develop really strong relationships with our current ones so that our fundraising and our financials are sustainable, so that we have people that want to stay with us as partners. And so I started working at MassChallenge about 1.5 years ago. Prior to that, I was a student in a university in Vermont, but I'm from California, and after I graduated, I was working at a startup in California, an educational technology startup called StudySync, and I had never worked in startups before. I had studied literature at the university, so never anything related to business, but the culture of the startup was so appealing to me, and I had such a great time working there. I loved my team, I loved the founders, that I thought I really want to work more with startups. So I moved to Boston. I really wanted to be in Boston. And I didn't know anyone, and I started kind of looking around and asking around, saying, I really want to work in startups, I really want to do this, and everyone said, you have to talk to MassChallenge. And so I was lucky enough to get a job, I was lucky enough to begin to work there, and it's been a really exciting place to be. And we're sort of at the center of the ecosystem, so we really get to know everything about the way that startups work, not only the 128 teams, but all of our partners and all of the different organizations in the Boston ecosystem that support entrepreneurs. So this is kind of what we're going to talk about. So I kind of broke down my presentation into sort of 3 big sort of topic areas, and we'll move through them. So the value proposition is the first thing, which is obviously very important when fundraising. And I made this presentation sort of from the perspective of other organizations, the ones that you guys represent, who might be interested in learning a little bit about what we do in order to maybe leverage some of those learnings for yourself in your own fundraising. So the value proposition, and before I kind of move into that, I wanted to sort of establish why you should listen to me, right? What have I done, what have we done at MassChallenge that makes me somehow an expert on fundraising? So we have a pretty significant track record at MassChallenge of fundraising. So we have generated about $10 million in sponsorship for over the past 4 years. So right now we have about 40 financial sponsors, so people that pay. They write checks for MassChallenge. And then we have about 50 in-kind sponsors, so people that donate other things to MassChallenge or to the startups themselves. And these are some of the brands that we work with. So about 60% of our funding, and this shows a little bit more. These are our financials over a year. So the first year we had about 1.2, and then we've been able to raise about 30% more each year. Compound annual growth rate. That last slide is actually pretty out of date. We've now raised almost the entire amount that we need for 2014. And I think the growth that we saw was in corporations and international groups. So about 60% from corporations, about 20% from foundations, about 10 to 20% from international entities, and the remainder from universities, law firms, and other sort of organizations. And so this is sort of the value proposition that MassChallenge has developed. It's very important to sort of differentiate yourself from other organizations. Why would a sponsor want to support your organization over other organizations that are trying to achieve different things? And so all of the sort of things that I outlined in when I was previously describing MassChallenge are the reasons why we believe that an organization or a corporation or another sort of sponsoring entity would want to support MassChallenge. We're not taking equity from the companies. We are providing this massive, neutral, aggregated value source, which is the startups, the 128 startups. And this is what the corporations are sort of paying to have access to. This is what I meant when I said the watering hole model. The idea that our scale gives us leverage and that we're able to concentrate these startups in one place. This is what keeps corporations coming back. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. And then I wanted to add something kind of at the bottom. There's like an asterisk that sort of this model, the reason why MassChallenge is a compelling value proposition for sponsors, it also applies to all of the other different people and organizations that we're trying to convince to be a part of our organization. So mentors, judges, applicants, people that want to apply to MassChallenge. It's all sales, right? Because we are only about 20 full-time staff. A year ago, we were 10. We're growing quite a bit, and we're not able to provide all of the value. So we have to have judges, we have to have mentors, speakers, everyone participating for free. And so there has to be something that is tremendously compelling about that model to get all these different groups, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, to be mobilized to support this movement, to support this organization. Does everything make sense so far? Does anyone have any questions? So this next slide is kind of like what we talk about when we talk about especially corporate partners. Why would a corporate partner want to sponsor MassChallenge? What is the value for them, and sort of what would they be getting out of the partnership? So these are sort of the 5 top most important values and areas of access that we offer for our corporate partners. So MassChallenge, we offer privileged access to corporations to the following benefits. The first one is the opportunity to invest in, license, purchase, or acquire technologies. So actually the startups as deal flow. That makes sense. The next one is having to do with customers, right? So actually engaging with early stage startups as customers. Maybe they're very small now, but if they are truly a high-growth startup, then they will be a very valuable customer a few years down the line. And also, when a startup raises money, the first thing that they need to do is spend it. We work with American Airlines and UPS, which is a shipping company. And these are people that want to generate loyalty from the ground up. And when you're a startup and you raise some money, you need to be shipping your product, you need to be traveling to meet with investors. So they're immediately spending money on these different things. And some of our large corporations have recognized that and have developed SME divisions in order to target these early stage companies for this purpose. Talent is the third sort of item. And talent is critical for every organization, particularly for large corporations that often struggle with attracting and retaining talent. So what MassChallenge provides access to is a concentrated population of really talented individuals. Entrepreneurial, innovative, smart, risk-taking, the kind of people that any corporation would really love to recruit. And many, most early stage acquisitions are maybe not necessarily for the startup themselves or for the business or for the technology, but for the founders, for the people. And so this is what we've seen actually quite a bit of. And that slide earlier mentioned there were a few startups that had been acquired in the early stage, and a lot of it was because they were such talented individuals. They were more talent acquisitions. And then, of course, branding, PR, and community development. I think perhaps this is very important in Russia with large companies, as it is in the United States and everywhere. It's very important for large corporations and for organizations, particularly with the way the economy is going and this trend in entrepreneurship and innovation, to show the world and to show the people that they interact with that that brand cares about innovation and is investing in innovation. Sometimes it is more genuine than in other instances, right? Sometimes it's a little bit more of a sort of tick box, as I think someone described it earlier, just sort of saying like, this is what we're doing, okay, here's my logo, moving on. But I think this is a key piece for everyone that we work with, at least. Whether or not your brand is sort of consumer facing, even if it's B2B, just making sure that your brand is associated with innovation and that people know about it is very meaningful. And then kind of like the fifth thing that we always talk about, and this one is very interesting, this is a very important reason why MassChallenge has been able to be successful, is sort of like the VIP piece of it. So not only are the startups, the sponsors paying to get access to the startups, but they're paying to get access to each other, right? So the idea that chief innovation officers at Verizon, Fidelity, Autodesk, all these different organizations, we can bring them together and sit them all down and they can share best practices together. And we have sort of like, you know, the head of the owners of the Red Sox and the owners of the Patriots and sort of like billionaire celebrity entrepreneurs in the Boston community who sit on our board and come to our events, and people will pay to get access to those. So we have created sort of an exclusive community of sponsors and of other groups, and the startups are a big part of that, but they're not the only piece. It's all about sort of building the network and building the community. So I wonder, I feel like I've been talking a lot. I would love to kind of hear reactions or questions or any sort of, does this make sense, or is this like totally an American thing, wouldn't work here? I doubt that. So what is, any sort of reactions or thoughts?
Realistically, you reach like 3.5 million a year, and that is to support the staff that you have, 20 people, or those are also mostly part-time?
So yeah, so that's about the question about our budget, like why do we have 3.5 million? That's our goal for this year, right? So we might not actually hit that, but we're close. And so about $1 million of that is what we give away to the teams at the end of the year. Another about 1.5 million is just for the staff salaries. And the rest is for investing in our technology, which is something that we received a pretty large grant from a local family foundation to invest in our technology. So to build up that sort of mentor database and that competition framework. And then the rest is for like operational overhead.
Let's say a startup is coming from Russia. Does it pay for travel and lodging itself, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there have been arrangements in the past with the Russian venture company to pay for some of the costs associated with the teams, but that's sort of a special relationship. We are not able to cover the costs of the teams while they're in the United States, but everything within the program is for free. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. This slide is something that was made a few years ago, and I think it's just a good kind of way to think about how are you differentiating your organization. If you're thinking about what I'm trying to present here and sort of some of these questions about differentiating your organization's value proposition when looking for funding, I think this is something that is interesting. And you know, it's fairly qualitative. I actually don't ever use this slide, but I do think that it's an interesting way to think about how is what MassChallenge does different, or what your organization does different from what already exists in the ecosystem. So in terms of impact on job creation, in terms of actually helping startups grow and hire more people, MassChallenge has been phenomenally successful. And in terms of the training that we're able to provide just as much training or more training than other organizations in our ecosystem. So this is a visual that we've been able to use to show people why we are a superior organization in the Boston ecosystem and a superior model around the world for supporting entrepreneurship at scale. So this is what the interactive part. I would love to hear, based on this slide, what are the areas of what are the value propositions that you guys offer when you're talking to sponsors, right? Maybe this is a great question to start with Generation S. I don't know if Yulia, you want to say something, or Sergey, or anyone else. Talk about why would a sponsor support one of your organizations? Do you use these ideas, or do you have other ideas?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
When you're coming to the company
Mhm.
and they donate or sponsor money to you, is this coming from the CSR budgets, or it's coming from just like the profit and it's just sponsorship or
Mhm.
whatever?
That's a really good question, actually. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but I'll quickly answer now. So typically not from the, so the question was, where does the money come from? When a large corporation sponsors us, what budget is it coming from? It actually ranges. So I'll outline a couple of those a little bit later, but typically not the corporate social responsibility or sort of philanthropic arm, although we have seen that. Typically it's strategy, venture, or innovation, like internal innovation, or open innovation, worldwide innovation, they call it different things at different organizations. Marketing is another one, business development. Those are the main groups that we work with depending on what that person is trying to achieve. So we see various ones.
That's probably the main difference.
Mm.
I'm not sure that well, other people face the problem, but mainly what we can access to is CSR budget. And CSR budgets here is really low, and they're more oriented on the charity things than on any business development issues.
Yeah.
As for sponsorship, yes, this exists, but it's very straightforward, and not many startups or initiatives can be followed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's interesting, and I think actually probably not terribly different. I think that probably maybe 5-10 years ago we were in the exact same place. I think that there has been significant development among the large corporations in terms of like their sophistication about thinking about early stage companies, and especially in the philanthropic side. You know, typically when I'm looking for foundations, right? So I'm also our head grant writer. I write all of our grants for MassChallenge. We've raised about, I forget, but somewhere around $1 million of grants. And it is very challenging to find philanthropic dollars that want to be spent on entrepreneurship. It's like if you're not a sick child or like a dying ecosystem or whatever, which is extremely deserving causes, but in terms of long-term economic development that is innovation driven, you'd be surprised. I mean, well, you would not be surprised, but it is surprising to me how difficult it is to find people that want to spend money on that. But it is possible, and in the United States probably more possible than here.
But then you said the same was 5-10 years ago. What changed it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I have never worked for a large corporation, so I'm not entirely sure. But based on my sort of experience working with our large corporations, they're starting to sort of become much more engagement oriented, right? So it's not just putting the logo on the wall. They've recognized that actually doesn't generate a tremendous amount of ROI, return on investment, that actually doesn't really accomplish very much. Putting your logo on the wall is important, but actually engaging in a meaningful and tactile or tangible way with the entrepreneurship community is what generates significant and measurable impact for the brand. And so I think that the forms that this takes, corporate venture capital is something that we're seeing quite a bit more in the United States. Most major brands have a corporate venture capital fund or a business development fund or some sort of organization that is focused on making investments or giving grants to startups and working with them from the very early stage to help develop, as they develop the application of their technology or the direction that their company is going to go. Corporations want to be a part of that conversation from the beginning. So actually dedicating people and time and money on the corporation side to literally mentoring startups, participating in sponsoring accelerator programs or getting involved as angel investors or whatever it may be, but actually like tangibly engaging with the community. So, and that takes a lot of different forms. And I'll outline a little bit later, kind of, I give some case studies about different corporations that we worked with, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do. That's a really good question though. Okay. Yes?
We support our partners and agents who have some events of two types generally. One of them is some federal events, which are well known and are provided from some big partner in Moscow, for example, who came to the region and this event occurs. The second one is their local events. And my partners struggle from difficulties of fundraising for these events because they're not so well known. So how they can make their proposition stronger for these events?
That's a really good question. It's a challenge. Absolutely, it's a challenge. And I think sometimes we think about this. There's like the hub model, right? I think one reason why the Moscow startup ecosystem is very successful, why the Boston startup ecosystem, right, is that they are hubs, right, and they attract all kinds of things that then become associated with the context of innovation. So what we're trying to develop, and we're not successful yet, it's in kind of progress, is the hub and spoke model. So this is a metaphor for like how you also have your hub, but you also have different spokes that are going out and generating activity too, sort of like this model that you've talked about. I think to start with, so I'll give an example, the UK, right? So we're launching MassChallenge UK at the end of this year. It'll be in London. But there are already actually 3 different programs throughout the UK, not in London, that are explicitly accelerator programs based off of MassChallenge. These are people that came to Boston, like a couple Scottish people and one person from Liverpool, Liverpudlian, who came to Boston and they saw MassChallenge and they were like, that's awesome, I want to make that in fill in the blank, Glasgow, Aberdeen, Liverpool. And this happened over the past 3 years or so. So we go into London and we're going to build MassChallenge, and we want to have this hub and spoke model. And the people that have been the most successful are actually the people up in Glasgow. The Entrepreneurial Spark is the name of the program. And what made them really successful is they found people that are powerful and have resources, i.e. money, but that care deeply about that region for whatever reason. So I don't know if this is applicable to you, but in Scotland, you have the Royal Bank of Scotland, which is one of the biggest banks in the world, but also has this historical tie to Boston. And then you also have a billionaire, just like 1 or 2 billionaires, but you only need like one, right? And he puts his name on things and he shows up and he gives money, and the fact that that billionaire cares about this program and he's willing to show up, and he doesn't care about London, right? He would never give us money, but he cares about Glasgow and he cares about supporting Scottish entrepreneurs. So maybe it's like about finding the different people in Russia that they don't care about Moscow that much, they care about fill in the blank, like that region, and that sort of generates more momentum and more excitement about that. So something to think about, but it's definitely challenging. And we can talk more about that after too. Any other questions before I move on? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the MassChallenge process for identifying potential sponsors, qualifying them, developing the relationship, closing, so actually getting them in, and then after that, so delivery, right? So that's like number 3, building and maintaining relationships. So that's sort of the next part of my presentation. And maybe after number 2, we can take like a quick break or something like that. So we do use kind of this methodology or this framework. And I'm a really big fan of pictures, visual representations of things. It just helps me think about it. So I made a little sales funnel. And this is the way that I think about it, because basically what you're trying to do is generate a tremendous amount of awareness and widespread public momentum around your initiative. But then ultimately you have to convert some of that, not all of it, you will never be able to convert all of it, but some of it into dollars that people are paying to support your organization to then generate back all of that awareness. So this is kind of the way that I think about it. It's very loose framework, and it doesn't always fit. Sometimes things happen in a strange, squirrely way that's not quite the way that it sort of happens in the model. So the first important thing about any sort of sales, and this is probably quite commonplace for you guys, but is awareness, right? And making sure that your brand is super well known. And I think that the value proposition and the brand are kind of like a chicken and an egg. Do you know this phrase? Like, which comes first? I don't know. You have to have them both, and they self-perpetuate each other. And so this is like the thing that I always think about. We have to develop and obviously for us, obviously the value proposition came first, but then we built the brand, which enhanced and strengthened the value proposition, and they both sort of built off each other. But having a brand, and having a brand associated with something that is tangible, in our case, the network, right? The network of people that we bring together is what generates this awareness. And so this is what happens. At this point now, we've been in existence for about 3 years. We're able to sort of have inbound inquiries, like people knocking on my door with checks wanting to give us money. That doesn't happen that often, but it does happen, which is awesome. And it didn't happen before when we first started. So that is about awareness. And obviously the marketing team does that, right? I guess I should talk about, so having a presence on social media, having a presence in the community, running events, attending events, and demonstrating thought leadership, whether that is generating content that people want to read, having a blog, having your Twitter, whatever. This is not my area of expertise, but you need to have this in place in order to demonstrate credibility to the ecosystem. And as the business development sort of person from our organization, we have actually 2 other people, so the 3 of us, plus our CEO, John. We're all responsible for this revenue generation, so it's very important for us to be external facing, show up at events, speak at events, be on panels. People need to know who you are and that you are a leader in the ecosystem in order to demonstrate this credibility. So we're always doing that, and the marketing team obviously helps. So that's sort of self-explanatory. So this, I was thinking, may not be super relevant for Russia. Some of these software things that I mentioned are probably not relevant at all, but they're what I use. And these are just kind of like, if you're talking about tactics of finding the people that you want to be sponsors and then developing them, kind of getting them in your wheelhouse, and then sort of having those conversations. And then at that, moving into where you actually ask the qualifying questions and determine whether or not they would be a good fit. At a high level, right, we use technology because I don't scale, right? I can only go to so many events, I can only have so many meetings, so technology scales. So we use, I should add, Salesforce. We were talking about this earlier. Having a good CRM system, I think, is very important. We used, I didn't put Salesforce on there, but it is the backbone of everything that we do. It's complicated. We only actually really started using it about 8 months ago. Before that, I think we used Excel for everything, which I think is maybe common. But it's much better to use a CRM system and keep all your people in line. And I think, like I said earlier, our value proposition, the main asset of our brand is our network. Having people, being able to connect your startups with people, not just investors, not just mentors, but potential customers, potential people that can get them to where they need to go, partners and investors, advisors, everything. It all kind of intermingles. And so you need to have a vast network in order to make those connections. And leveraging partners too. I can talk more about that later, but you can't do everything yourself. And a successful, sophisticated startup ecosystem works together and leverages people. You can't be an expert in everything. So LinkedIn, obviously, in the United States, perhaps it's true here, I'm not sure. In the United States, it is the sort of, I don't know the right word, but it is the most widely used technology for business. So everyone's on LinkedIn, everyone has a LinkedIn profile. It's how you find people, it's how you qualify people, determine if they're a good fit for whatever purpose, whether it's a hire or whether it's a potential mentor or potential associate in any sort of way. There are some technologies, and RelSci is very similar to LinkedIn. A couple of technologies. Reportive is a Gmail plugin. So you can essentially, whenever you type in an email address, the person's face and all of their social media profiles will pop up on the side of your screen. You've heard of this before. It's very helpful, especially if you don't know someone's email address and you're trying to find it. If you know their colleagues, for example, like I don't know, like if you don't know Kara's email address at MassChallenge, but you know like Scott's email address, you know that it's just Scott at MassChallenge. If you type in Kara at masschallenge.org, which is my email address, then all of a sudden all my information pops up and you know that you have the right email address. It's very good for stalking. Stalking is very important for getting new potential sponsors. Does this translate, stalking? No? To stalk someone, it's like a very creepy thing. It's like you stand outside their bedroom door and wait for them to come out, like creepy, but it's very important. Anyway, so and then Yesware is a great technology that shows you when someone has opened the email that you sent to them. I use this all the time, and it kind of shows you if the emails that you're sending, cold emails, are being opened, if people are finding them to be interesting, if sort of you're cold emailing potential sponsors and nobody's opening your email, you should probably change your email. And the email that you're using. And this is, I talk about warm versus cold emails. I don't know if that translates. Obviously, it's much better to have an introduction, right? A warm email. So they know you from something, you have some sort of external validation. But cold emails work too. In the United States, we use them quite often. And it's the kind of rule of thumb is the shorter the better. This is getting very tactical, but I thought that I would share some of our, and I can return to this also afterward if people have tactical questions for me about how do you like specifically do this, I can answer that. And like I said, networking events where we meet a lot of sponsors and we're potential partners at networking events. And sort of always making sure that every meeting that you go to, you're asking for more introductions from that person, so that if you meet with one person, you ask for 2 introductions, and then you ask for 2 introductions for each, and then the network expands. This is what we always do at MassChallenge. It's how we've been able to grow from 2 people in the beginning of 2010 to thousands of people who are now working with us, either as mentors or as judges or as speakers or as applicants, alumni, sponsors, investors in the community. So this is also a little bit more about qualifying, and this is sort of speaks to the question earlier as to who could be potential sponsors. And again, this may not be relevant, but I thought that sharing sort of what we do might help illuminate how things might work here. So these are the different divisions that we work with. Like I said, strategy, business development, marketing, and determining the difference and differentiating between a decision maker who can actually write the check for you versus a champion, someone who can advocate internally, who can influence a decision maker and help to ultimately process the deal and convert that potential sponsor into a sponsor is very important. And it's very important to have both. You obviously don't need a champion if you have a decision maker, but if that decision maker gets promoted and is no longer in charge of that budget, then you're going to wish that you had a champion who can then advocate to influence the next decision maker. And when you're working with very convoluted, very confusing, very bureaucratic corporate structures, it's very important to kind of know how to navigate through that and identify the best person to work with. And at this point, right when you've identified the people, the correct people who are well positioned, who are interested in innovation, who could be good sponsors, this is when you ask qualifying questions, right? This is when you determine whether or not they are a fit. We are of the belief that there's always something that we can do. Innovation is so hot and entrepreneurship is so important to large corporations that we are always able to find some pain point that we can help address via the value in our network. So we ask such questions as, what are your goals with regard to innovation? How are you working with are you working with accelerator programs now? Have you ever envisioned working with accelerator programs in the future? So this is sort of the process. This is kind of what we do. And then, we have different levels of sponsorship. So some are right for others. The universities and the law firms are at the 20, so we have $25,000 as like our lowest level, and then $250,000 and above is our highest level. And those are people that are on our board. I can talk about that more too. And then again, tactics, but some of the tools that we use and find very valuable, letters of support. So we'll have people write, very influential people will write a letter of support. It takes them 2 minutes, right? We write the letter of support for them, we send it to them, they sign it, put it on their letterhead, and then we go and we say, look, Deshbande supports us, and that adds that external validation, and that really helped us, especially in our early years, but we still use them now as we're launching our London-based program, right? It's sort of like starting MassChallenge all over again in London, which has been really, really exciting. We use letters of support again, sort of back to the roots. And then we use partnership proposals. So clearly this is a common thing in many areas of the work that you guys do, but we use partnership proposals to sort of define and create sort of the groundwork for the partnership and outlining the different ways that we can add value for the organization. We make them customized for each potential deal. And urgency, that's just how we close the deal, right? So you move into close the deal, and I'm going to pause here, but urgency just means what we always use is sort of like, and what we tell all of our startups is, here's how you close someone, right? Like I am on the world's most awesome party bus right now. It's called MassChallenge. You all want to be on it. Everyone wants to be on it. It's leaving. Are you in or are you out? And that's kind of like the idea. Even when you have a startup that you don't have a product, you don't have anything, right? You don't have funding, you don't have revenues, but you need to convince someone that your thing is so awesome that they're going to lose out if they don't make a decision now. So it's sort of like the mindset, and that's sort of what we use. And urgency is critical because we are a startup, we are a nonprofit, and we don't have all the time in the world, whereas corporations do. So I'm going to pause, and maybe we can take a break, and then I have one more sort of short piece that talks more in detail about corporate partnerships afterward, and then I can address other questions too. Okay? And there's so much food, and there's coffee, and there's fruit, there's water. And I have to apologize, I am like so sick right now. I showed up in Russia and I just like got allergic to everything, so. But I haven't sneezed yet during this presentation, which is like a tremendous, yeah, whoa. Sorry, I forgot that I'm attached. And that's what they're telling me, is that it's birch.
Probably birch.
Yeah, birch flower or something. But I showed up and I just like sneezing everywhere.
I have a couple of relatives who actually leave Moscow for like 3 months. They take their kids and they fly to places.
Oh my gosh, I can understand. Okay, so maybe just like a couple minutes and then we'll start again.
Exchange course.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm not sure I will stay till the end.
Okay.
Basically, I'm coming to Boston meet me with one of my colleagues. Do you think there is something to take a look at MassChallenge?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Well,
just to get a feeling, not
yes.
so special.
So it's kind of key to everything that we're able to do. And building successful relationships with corporate partners and with all of our partners is the reason why MassChallenge has been able to be sustainable, because we're able to attract more funding every year. Almost all of our partners come back and work with us again, and then we're able to use those success stories to leverage more interest and more partners to grow our organization. So some of these things are, again, pretty self-explanatory, but I had to include them because they do form the foundation of successful relationships. So partnerships are obviously a two-way street. Not only are the corporations providing us with cash, right? They're not just writing a check and walking away. This is not happening with any of our successful partnerships. Some of our unsuccessful partnerships have had this element to them. So maybe there was just someone was not engaging fully with the organization and with the program, and they didn't necessarily see the value, because the value comes from engaging with the program. And I will talk about specific examples of how this actually works in a minute. So we're not just writing a check and walking away. We're getting pretty heavily involved, and they're providing access to maybe their technology, maybe their network, maybe they're donating products or services to the startups, maybe they're volunteering their time as mentors, and in return we're providing them access to all this value that I described earlier, as well as sort of customized experiences that really make sure to hit the goals of the corporations when partnering with MassChallenge. So this is what we do. We identify what they need, and then we strategize to deliver it. And I'll show you how that actually works. This is kind of like what I talked about earlier, but why do corporations partner with MassChallenge? Well, because they want all of these things. They want early stage technologies, they want sort of a looking glass into the future. I think this is particularly relevant for the strategy groups that we partner with, or the venture groups, or the innovation groups. It's not necessarily that this early stage company that we have in our program is relevant to this big corporation now, but maybe in a couple of years it will be. Maybe it's important for the large company to partner with that startup or begin the conversation of a potential partnership very early so that the adaptation and the development of that technology can meet the needs of the corporation as it grows. Maybe this is beneficial for the startup and the corporation. Or maybe it's this idea of a looking glass into the future. Verizon is a partner of ours, right? One of the biggest corporations in the world. They make large investments, right? Typically at the Series A or later. Our companies are very early stage, so when they enter MassChallenge, our only requirement is that they have less than $500,000 in private equity funding and less than $1 million in revenues. So this is very early stage, typically about 3 people is the average size of a startup. So Verizon is not probably going to invest in one of our companies while they're in the program. They might invest in our alumni, and they have, but probably not while they're in the program. In the program, what they're seeing is a broad-scale map of innovations that may affect Verizon 5-10 years down the line. So this is sort of seeing the cutting edge of what is being developed in multiple areas, multiple industry sectors that might be relevant to Verizon in a few years. This is the looking glass idea. And then we've talked about a lot of these different ideas. I think internal innovation is very important for large corporations, where culture has become stagnant and potentially anti-innovation, and maybe there's a little bit more of a attraction to the status quo, and the culture is not so entrepreneurial. So offering these tangible touch points to help people engage with the startup scene through MassChallenge is something that people will pay for. Okay, so how does it actually work? I've decided to provide a couple of different examples, and I can talk about each of these ones. What do we actually do with corporations to add value? So, Fidelity. Fidelity is our top sponsor. They pay us over $250,000 a year. They're at the diamond level. They sit on our board. What are their goals? So when we originally partnered with Fidelity, and Fidelity, I don't know, they're a massive bank, the mutual fund, and they do also sort of retirement funds, and really big bank in the US. Do you have Fidelity here? Maybe? No? Yeah? So it's a pretty well-known brand in the US. And then they're based in Boston, which helps. So their CEO and all their senior management is local, which is important. And this is an interesting question about how does MassChallenge scale when the senior management is not necessarily nearby. So their key goals are branding and being perceived as giving back to the community. So a little bit of the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, that is important to Fidelity, as well as being innovative, being perceived by the community to be innovative also. And they are an innovative company. They have the Fidelity Center for Applied Technologies, which showcases and invests in early stage technologies and incubates internal ideas. So they actually have an internal incubator where employees who have really great ideas are able to spend some time isolated to develop those ideas. And they wanted to leverage best practices from MassChallenge in order to improve upon that program. And then innovative technologies, the idea that there are financial services technologies or big data or marketing technologies. Fidelity spends a tremendous amount of money on advertising, so they would love to see new, innovative, creative ideas to further their business across multiple industry sectors that might impact their business. And how do we work with them? So they have a seat on our board. They have significant insight and sort of influence on our strategic direction via our board of advisors. So one person sits on that board. They helped us organize, and we helped sort of invite this Chief Innovation Officer dinners. We call them Innovating from Within. So we have a series of dinners that we put together, and like I said, the idea of bringing together Chief Innovation Officers of multiple big brands so that they can talk in a substantive way about problems that are facing all of them, challenges that they are facing, even though they're working in different sectors. So Fidelity helped us put this together, and we collaborated with them on the invitee list and on the sort of logistics. broad employee involvement. So big banks, maybe not the most innovative place in the world typically. So the idea is to help inspire employees and provide them with tangible, concrete, and sort of distinct areas to actually engage with innovation. So this means maybe you participate in MassChallenge as a judge or as a mentor. Maybe you're evaluating applications, evaluating pitches, sitting on panels to listen to pitches and help decide, how viable is that idea? Does it have tremendous impact? Does it have tremendous potential? Maybe they're engaging as a mentor also in the program. So maybe they're working directly with early stage technologies and early stage companies, and as one of the 2 to 4 mentors that each MassChallenge team is paired with during the summer. And all of this helps create this sort of interest and excitement and opportunities for people within Fidelity to get engaged with early stage companies that's tangible and that's real. And we also work with their VC group, Devonshire Investments, potentially, investing in technologies that are coming out of MassChallenge. We work on showcasing events with them. So this picture is from a pitch day that we were able to put together just for Fidelity employees. We brought a bunch of startups that they helped us select out of our alumni pool. We brought them over to Fidelity and they were able to pitch and have this really exciting experience. About 100 top Fidelity executives came and they were able to listen to pitches from technologies from across the spectrum. And then network sharing, I think, is really critical. Our board member, Sean Balka, who is a senior vice president at Fidelity, he works with the Fidelity Center for Applied Technologies. He's on our board, and he's very open about sharing his network and helping us refer in other potential sponsors or people that could be very valuable that we would never potentially otherwise have access to. But he knows them, and he brings them in. Potentially, they could be relevant to a startup as a mentor or as a connection, as an investor. So being open to sharing your network and sort of broadening the network around the cause of innovation. So we do all these things with Fidelity. And the result, they've sponsored us year over year, each year, and they've only increased the number of people that have gotten involved and the number of things that we do with them. So that's just a selection. The actual list of things that we do with Fidelity is probably like 10 pages long. We are so heavily involved with them. And this is a very big part of what I do on a day-to-day basis, is work with Fidelity and our other partners on kind of coming up with unique, innovative, unexpected ways that we can partner and add value so that we're adding more and more value, and so that it's more and more important within Fidelity to continue to expand that relationship. Any questions about Fidelity or about any of the things that I just talked about? Okay, so UPS is another good example. UPS is a familiar brand here, maybe. Obviously, they ship packages. They do a lot more than ship packages. They actually do like full logistics, supply chain sort of like mapping for startups and for all companies, obviously. So the average like size of a UPS sort of account is big, right? So early stage companies probably don't move the needle that much, but they want to get to you before FedEx does. So that's why they engage with early stage technologies. And they do this through their marketing group. So as I mentioned with Fidelity, we work with the Fidelity Center of Applied Technologies primarily, which is their sort of center for their incubator and their innovative programs. We also work with a number of other groups, but that's our main group. At UPS, we work with the marketing group, and that's primarily a regional group, although we do have touch points into corporate, which is based in Atlanta. And so they're interested in getting to you before FedEx does, and then branding. I mean, everyone's kind of interested in branding. So being seen as fun and cool. And branding, I mean, we did this event called Minute to Pitch It. So 60 startups pitch in 60 minutes, which is fun, and we do it every year. And UPS was the sponsor, one of the sponsors. And so that's Sheila from UPS doing her one minute pitch on UPS for the startups. So kind of having all these startups pitch and then having UPS, which is probably has the least innovative seeming brand out of all of our sponsors, and having them get up there and pitch alongside the startups was kind of like a fun way to show the community that UPS cares and has a relevant offering for startups. So what do? They have someone, actually it is Sheila, who is dedicated to being at MassChallenge and other accelerator programs in the Boston area, being available, literally in person or on the phone, for any startup that wants to ship a product or a package at any time, whether it's a contract, whether it is literally like a prototype, or an order if they're actually have their products and they're ready to ship, they're having revenues and customers and things like that. There is someone who is there, not every day, but every week definitely, and almost every day during the accelerator. You can just call her and she'll help you out. And there's a discount, so 33% off, about a third off of any offer or any order through UPS while they're in the program. So they do a lot of other things. They give the discount, they sponsor events, they get involved as mentors, and they do these sort of logistic supply chain mapping for our alumni. So they kind of go in and actually take a startup that's maybe starting to ship and starting to bring product from one location, manufacture it in one area, and then ship it to another area, and help them sort of think through what this means and how they can cut costs. So these are the sort of things that they do. We've been able to generate $250,000 in revenue for them over the course of last year, and the marketing team in the Northeast was able to share what they do with MassChallenge to the corporate group, and then that group disseminated the information across every region in the US. And now every region in the US is partnering with accelerator programs and implementing this same model across the US, which is really good. And then I just have one more quick example, just to kind of show another perspective. And I've shown different levels also. So Fidelity is at the diamond level, UPS is at the silver level, which is our lowest level, and then Autodesk is at the gold level, sort of like a middle level. And it's good to have sort of different tiers of engagement and help sort of differentiate and prioritize in terms of the capacity planning on our side. Fidelity is obviously our top priority. So Autodesk is do you know this brand? It's computer software for like visual modeling and things like that. They have AutoCAD, which is their most well-known product. They want access to innovation for potential acquisitions or partnerships, as well as internal innovation. So just having their employees more engaged in the startup community. So we have this individual, his name is Rick, and he is he's a senior director, and he's the technology and innovation strategist is his title. So his job is basically just to form innovative partnerships with different organizations throughout the Boston area. And they also, potentially want people to be using AutoCAD instead of SolidWorks, which is like their competitor that's much more prominent in the Boston ecosystem. And so they're getting kind of really, and this is an interesting sort of play for a technology company. There's this whole thing called the makers movement, or the maker movement. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. In the US, it's becoming really popular, the idea of startups that are not just doing like software technologies, but are actually building physical products and making physical things. So whether you're soldering or you have 3D printers, this is all about kind of like making stuff. And it's becoming like the idea of like next generation manufacturing is becoming very popular throughout the startup ecosystem. And so we, together with Autodesk and a couple of other sponsors in our new space that we're moving to in a couple of weeks, we will have about 5,000 square feet with about several $100,000 worth of manufacturing equipment for prototyping, adjacent to our space for free for all the startups to use, which is really valuable because we have quite a few hardware startups who are interested in this. And Autodesk is aligning itself very closely with the maker movement, which is a savvy thing for them to be doing. So they're involved very heavily as mentors. We ran a mini demo day for them. This is the picture, it shows judging, but it's also the same as sort of a mini demo day, just for Autodesk executives to come in, and they handpicked the startups that they wanted to listen to. And then they had a full day of just listening, or a half day of just listening to pitches that might be relevant. And this provides sort of an exclusive experience for Autodesk executives to listen to startups pitching who have direct relevance to various aspects of Autodesk business. So we were able to put this together for them. They give away many thousands of dollars worth of software to MassChallenge startups, which provides, again, a very exclusive opportunity for MassChallenge startups and has really good sort of positive branding for Autodesk within the community. And then we kind of bring them on Rick loves sort of doing VIP sort of cool things and getting into like the hip element of the sort of tech ecosystem, and MassChallenge was able to provide that. The owners of the Red Sox in Boston own a yacht, a really nice yacht, and we get to have parties on it. So we invite Autodesk, and we invite Fidelity, and we invite sort of our top sponsors and our top partners to that. And that actually, like, it seems sort of superfluous. The idea is you're creating something that is exclusive and special, and people pay money for that, which is true. So, and then the results is that we actually help them implement an incubator in their Autodesk space in Boston, and they have expanded the grant program to more software. Let me see. So I'll quickly, I'm almost done, and then we can have questions too. Couple challenges in terms of working with corporations. I think the biggest challenge that we have faced is not finding the right fit within the organization. So maybe entering into or trying to enter into a sponsorship relationship with someone or some group that doesn't make sense necessarily from the innovation perspective or from a sponsorship perspective. Maybe they are like in a sales team for like enterprise sales or something like that. So the startups are probably not going to be very good customers for them. So I'll tell, like on a real example, Oracle. We had a partnership with Oracle last year. They were a sponsor. We were working with their enterprise sales group, and it wasn't very productive. They weren't able to find startups that wanted to buy multi-$1,000 software licenses from Oracle, and they didn't have anyone else in the local office that wanted to engage. It was sort of like a 30-minute drive, 45-minute drive from Boston, and we weren't able to sort of identify what the key touch points within that group were, and so we're not working with that group from Oracle this year. If I were to work with Oracle again, I would want to work with their strategy group, or I would want to work with their group that's trying to develop technologies that they can sell to early stage companies, which Oracle is not particularly good at. Their competitors are, IBM and EMC, which we do work with. So that's kind of an example of you got to find the right person, otherwise you're just sort of spinning your wheels. And then obviously differences in culture and pace. At MassChallenge, we kind of always operate like we're going to die tomorrow. That's just the way that we work. We always feel that way. We're probably not going to anymore. In our first couple years, we might have. But we haven't died yet. We probably won't die tomorrow, but that's how we always feel. Corporations, not quite the same, so the pace can be a little bit different, which can be challenging. There can be 6-month cycles, whereas our cycle is like tomorrow, next week. And then in terms of goals and expectations, I think it's sort of the same idea. Making sure that what the expectations for the partnership are very, very clear up front. They can't be thinking that they're going to invest in 10 or 20 startups out of the MassChallenge pool. If they find a fit, it might be smaller, or there has to be some sort of managed expectations around what is the value that you're going to be able to get out of the partnership. And we try our best, even though much of what we do is intangible, we try our best to manage expectations up front so that nobody is disappointed or confused, because I think for many large corporations, the tech scene and the innovation and entrepreneurship scene is like a wild, wild west or something. It's like very difficult to understand what is going on, what is happening, what value can I get out of this, what are the KPIs, what are the metrics, what are the ROIs, and we have to be like, okay, it's not quite like that, it's a little bit different here. And if you explain that up front, it avoids conflict and issues later. So this is always kind of like a journey. Okay, so that's kind of the end. I wanted to leave you sort of with 3 key takeaways that I covered in the presentation. One is articulating a compelling value proposition, differentiating your organization from other organizations that may be doing something similar. What is unique about your organization? What is unique about what you can offer to a potential partner? This is very important. The second is about the process. So what is your process for identifying potential partners, potential sponsors, potential funders, qualifying them, determining whether or not they may be a good fit, bringing them into your organization, and then finally building and maintaining a really good relationship with them is all about managing expectations up front and being very clear about what your organization is about, what is your value proposition, what do you not do. This is all something that we do at MassChallenge. It's not an art, it's not a science, it's an art, but this is kind of the value that we have been able to develop, and I hope that it translates. I hope that it's relevant. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Yes.
What's your strategy on are going to be, say, in 5 years?
Our 5-year strategy. It's a really good question. So actually, our CEO just sort of validated with our board of advisors our 5-year strategy, which is to have 10 MassChallenges all over the world within the next 5 years. So we launched a program in Tel Aviv in Israel at the beginning of 2013. We're launching a program in London at the end of this year, and then the goal is within the next 5 years to have 10 MassChallenges all over the world. And what this will create is a network of interconnected hubs of entrepreneurial activity where high-impact, high-potential startups from all over the world can get access to the resources that they need across boundaries and across barriers. This is our vision. This is how we're going to operationalize our mission of catalyzing a global startup renaissance, and it can only happen globally. And we really think that entrepreneurship is global. Startups need to basically be multinational startups from day one, and making sure that they get access to the right investors, the right partners, the right advice, the right mentors, the right potential customers from the very beginning. And we think that we can do this through this network. So this is what we're piloting, and so that's the plan. But there's a lot of questions, right? The sustainability of the model. Can we fundraise in other locations in the same way that we've been able to do here? Time will tell. I think we're a startup, so failing is native to us. We're used to failure. So we probably will fail at something, and we'll figure it out, and then we'll kind of reiterate and move on. But that's the plan. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. This is awesome. I will be happy to talk to any of you after the presentation if you have individual questions. And I'm really, really excited to be here. So thank you guys so much. Spasiba.